through the protocols briefly. Only speak when invited by the chair. If you wish to speak, please raise your hand and direct all communication via the chair. Will everyone please ensure that their mics are muted when they're not speaking, apart from the chair? And speak and be succinct and do not exceed the allocated time. If you're referring to a specific page or picture in the report, refer to the page number. If you have any technical difficulties, please use the chat function in Google Meet to alert the meeting. Please do not use the chat function for putting formal questions to the subcommittee. Any persistent disruptive behaviour will result in removal from the meeting. Once the application has been considered, any remaining parties will be asked to log out of the hearing. Please do so promptly so the councillors will have the opportunity to deliberate and make a decision. Each party will be notified of the decision within 5 working days. If I can start off with the first item on the agenda, can we elect a chair, please?
Could I nominate Councillor Root, please?
Thank you very much, Councillor Snell. I'd be happy to chair the meeting. So in that case, I think the next item on the agenda is asking the licensing officer if they would please outline the
Sorry, Chair. Sorry to interrupt. If we could go back to the agenda, and if we could just follow the agenda, we need to do declarations of interest, etc. So if you could that would be fine. Thank you. And also, could you please confirm before we start this item, the items which are no longer being heard today, what the status of those are now for parties observing?
Yes.
It's on page 2 of the original document, Councillor Root.
Thank you. So, okay, I'm with you. I was looking at the wrong page of the agenda. I do apologise. In that case, then, firstly, let's. Can I ask whether anyone has a declaration of interest that they would like to declare? Councillor Snell.
Can we note the fact that the meeting was publicised with Councillor Kofo David? That was a mistake. He wasn't available this afternoon, which is why the meeting will proceed with just 2 councillors, which is perfectly acceptable under the current licensing policy. I don't have any declaration of interest, no.
Okay, thank you. In that case, perhaps we could ask one of the officers to clarify exactly what's happened to the other items which were listed on this agenda, if that would be possible. Do
you want me to confirm, Suba, or do you want to?
I can confirm it.
Yeah, that's fine.
So the premises for the crickets, it has been approved under the delegated authority, and the rest of the temporary notice, the relevant responsible authorities have withdrawn their objections. So it has been acknowledged. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Suba. So in short, this is the only item on the agenda now, the Market House, which is good because it means we've got plenty of time to look at it in some detail. Returning to where I was before, if I could ask the license.
Sorry, Penny, you're still jumping ahead a bit, I'm afraid. Normally the chair. Sorry, everybody understand. This is Councillor Root's first chairing of the meeting, and she's trying to get us finished too quickly, I think. So we've got 1 or 2 niceties along the way. So on page 2. The chair normally runs through licensing subcommittee hearing procedure, which is the bit set out on page 21 of the report. And then we also have to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of October, which I chaired. So those are the next 2 items if we go through the agenda on page 2, Penny.
Councillor Root, you're on mute.
Thank you. And the chair shouldn't mute themselves either, should they? That's rule number 1, I think. Good. Okay. So in that case, if I could ask everyone to take a quick look at page 21 in the agenda, which sets out the procedures, which is essentially what I was working to when I should have been working to page 2. So you'll see that when we get underway, the licensing officer will outline the report into this application, and the applicant will present their case. Everybody has 5 minutes for that. I will then ask the relevant authorities, in this case the police, I believe, to outline any objections that they have. And then we'll move on to look at any other objections that there may be. And we'll have a discussion about that. Then we'll have a moment for the responsible authorities and other persons to summarize their position after the discussion. And finally, Councillor Snell and myself will have opportunities to seek any clarification if there's anything still that we haven't understood. And then we will move to make a decision in private, and the applicant rather, will be notified usually next day of the result of our discussions. Any questions? Good, okay. Now, the minutes of the previous meeting, are we happy to agree those, Councillor Snell?
Yeah, I chaired that meeting, and I'm happy to agree that they are a true record. Thank you.
Good, okay. As I say, item 6 has now been agreed and withdrawn, so we're moving on to item 7 on the agenda, the application for Market House. And if I could therefore ask the licensing officer to outline the report, that would be good. Thank you. Sorry for the confusion at the beginning.
Thank you, Chair. Licensing service are a receipt of an application for a premises license under Section 17 of the Licensing Act 2003 for the Market House, 3234 Broadway Market, for recorded music, late night refreshment, and to authorize the supply of alcohol for consumption on and off the premises as stated in the agenda. Since the draft of the report, the applicant has provided additional submission in which they have reduced the hours for late night refreshment and the supply of alcohol. The environmental enforcement withdrawn their representation based on agreed conditions 21 to 26 as set out within the report. Representations remains from the police and the other persons. We have also received an additional information from one other person which has been circulated. I have nothing else to add. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. And just to be clear about this, I believe that this additional information which has come in from the applicant has been on the council website now for over a week. So I assume that everybody in the meeting has had the opportunity to look at that in advance. And now if we can... Sorry, Councillor Snell, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to clarify, if I could, which of the other persons we have here today, and if the other objections stand anyway. Could somebody tell us that?
Chair, I think what might be helpful is if you do some introductions, and then all the persons present can introduce themselves so that we know.
That's a very good idea. So I'll start with myself. I'm Councillor Root. I am a councillor representing Victoria Ward. Councillor Snell.
I'm Councillor Peter Snell representing Dalston Ward.
Perhaps if I could ask the officers to introduce themselves, and then we'll look at everybody else in the meeting.
I'm Subhashri Ramana, Principal Licensing Officer.
I'm Amanda North from Legal Services.
Rabia, you're on mute.
Sorry, Rabia Khatun, Government Service Officer.
Thank you. Mario, do you want to explain who you are?
Mario here from ICT Support.
Thank you. And I think that's all the officers present, isn't it?
Yes, and then if the other parties can introduce themselves as well, please.
If I may, my name's Julian Overton. I'm a solicitor and I represent the applicant in this case.
Thank you. Is the applicant present?
Yep, my name is Eric. I work for Market House Limited.
Thank you. And
I'm Ben Siegler, and I also work with Market House Limited.
so you're representing the applicant. Perhaps I can ask anybody else in the meeting who is not representing the applicant.
Hello, my name's Nick Bridge. I'm a local resident. Thank you for the invitation.
I'm just trying to change my screen so that I can see everybody. At the moment, I can only see.
Nadia, would you be able to assist in identifying whether any other parties from other persons are present?
Mr. Atkins.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm PC Atkins. I'm from the Hackney Police Licensing Unit.
Thank you. I think that's everybody now, isn't it? Good. Okay. In that case, let's move on. And if we could hear from the applicant to present the case for the application, please.
Thank you very much. I hope not to take up too much of your time. I think the application is full and explanatory, and I'm grateful to the licensing authority in allowing us to submit further submissions, which I hope clarify points, offer a little further explanation, and most importantly, address some of the concerns. And at the back of that document is a summary of the additional conditions that the applicant now offers, having had the benefit of the consultation that's taken place so far. If I may just start with a few general principles. Chair, this application will be considered on its own merits and in accordance with the statement of licensing policy. And of course, the general principle there is that the applicant, we, must demonstrate an understanding of the nature of the locality and show that this has been taken into consideration whilst preparing the operating schedule of this application. And I say that we clearly have in this case. The applicant has a very long association with Broadway Market, particularly and significantly in respect of licensed premises, and indeed these premises in their previous incarnation before the site was redeveloped. This is an application that's taken a long time in its formulation. A lot of thought has gone into it. And I think the understanding of the applicant has been enhanced by the consultation process in this case, and perhaps demonstrated by the further submissions, is that the residents and the police and the concerns that have been raised have been addressed, I say, and show that that true understanding is there. So for me, the general principle one is there and well established. And of course, the other general principle is that this proposal reflects the council's aspiration to encourage a range of diverse nighttime activities, whilst at the same time promoting the licensing objectives. And that's very much what the applicant seeks to do with this application. And again, I say that general principle is made out. There's a long and substantial operating schedule. The applicant, we like to think, we anticipated some of the difficulties that may arise in this area through our personal knowledge, but it's also been achieved through the consultation process in this case, which began before the formal consultation in a pre-consultation with responsible authorities. So we think it's a long journey, and we think that the general principles in this case are made out. Now, if I may just talk very briefly about the premises, and forgive me if this is a repetition of the content of the submissions, but I think it's important. What's being proposed here is a bar restaurant, and it's not a late night bar. It's not a late night music venue. It's not a bar. It is a establishment, and the vision of my client's vision is very clear to him that it's a bar-restaurant. It is a place where the majority of guests are seated at tables. There's an emphasis on the service of alcohol to people who are seated and enjoying substantial meals. We are now proposing limits on the amount of vertical drinking that takes place here. It's closer to a restaurant than a bar, we say. And what we also say is that this is substantially different from a bar and from a drinking-led establishment. I think we know that the risks associated with respect to crime and public nuisance are much diminished when one is dealing with a restaurant rather than a bar. Our bar restaurant, we say, is such a premises. It's not something that should cause concern that on the basis it's a drink-led establishment. And this, of course, was the primary concern of the police. And in my conversation with PC Atkins some time ago, discussions were had on conditions that would appropriately limit these premises so that they couldn't become a bar, so that they couldn't become a drink-led establishment. And the conditions we've offered is to limit the number of vertical drinkers, to a specified number, and also thereafter to say that the supply of alcohol must be to people seated at tables. Now, perhaps what the police sought at an early stage, and perhaps what the councillors may seek, is a more traditional restaurant-style condition that the supply of alcohol is contingent upon purchase of a substantial meal. And my client resists that through no motive other than his vision of this bar restaurant is to offer a degree of flexibility to these patrons, that it could be possible to come to be seated in this establishment to drink an alcoholic drink without being forced to buy a meal. And that's the philosophy behind it. We're very keen to restrict the number of vertical drinkers, very keen to make this a seated establishment, and that's why the conditions offered in those terms. Chair, you may know there's a similar condition, it's condition G12 in Hackney's list of model conditions, where it talks about limiting a percentage of the patrons must be seated, a particular percentage of patrons. And the condition that we offered mirrors that in some respects. We would say that the condition offered would mean only around 20% of those patrons wouldn't be seated at tables. I think that's enough on the premises. But what we have, I think, is something that's a much different proposition from the pub and latterly the bar that was there before. And this would be a much, much more heavily regulated premises, where the emphasis would be much more on seated patrons eating food. I think the only other thing really to draw attention to the committee are the other conditions that have been offered in the additional submissions, and they centre around the concerns that were raised, particularly regarding the courtyard. So on some consideration, some thought, we'd followed Hackney's policy on outside areas in limiting the timings of the courtyard so that they close at 10 p.m. Hackney policy. We're very happy to follow that. But on consideration of the representations, we've limited the number of people permitted to be in that area. We've insisted that those people be seated. We've added a condition that there be no live music in that courtyard area in case there were any concerns of that nature. They all relate to that small outside space at the rear of the building, which in due course will be obscured by a further building, although I can't offer you a date on when that will be. Similarly, it was suggested by one of the residents, I believe, that a drug policy be enforced, and although perhaps we question the relevance of that, we're very happy to adopt one. And I've set out in the document the kind of things that we think should be in that policy, and we'd be very happy to write that policy in consultation with the police, and very happy to take on any further suggestions on the content of that. I think significantly, we've also suggested, in light of the concerns regarding dispersal and the concerns that residents have about what happens on the street rather than what happens inside these premises, is the addition of conditions that we have SIA accredited security guards on Friday and Saturday nights, and their role will be crucial in upholding the licensing objective in respect of crime and disorder, but also public nuisance, because our dispersal policy this will help our dispersal policy, and we will not have patrons loitering outside the building. They'll be encouraged to disperse, and that seems to be one of the key concerns here that's been expressed by residents, is what goes on in the market, perhaps rather than less so than what goes on inside the buildings. Now, in conclusion, there's a lot of mention in here about from the residents and from police about saturation and about cumulative impact. We know this is not a special policy area, and if it were, there'd be a presumption against this application. I'd be trying to rebut that presumption. I'd have to establish that there would be no negative cumulative impact at all from this application in order to be successful. But that's not the situation that we are in. The residents and anybody else is entitled to raise issues of cumulative impact, and they're perfectly entitled to do that. I think there's a question as to whether the market is saturated with licensed premises. That's not clearly something that the council have established yet by not making a special policy area. I think that as sad as the consequences of it may have been, the restrictions over the Coronavirus Act, which forced more people outdoors, it is said by the police and by residents have made matters worse, and that is most unfortunate, but hopefully temporary. And in any event, suggests that saturation is perhaps not the issue here. And in conclusion, we think that this is a sound application that establishes very strongly the general principles involved, and that the applicant has demonstrated themselves to be very willing to listen and as a good example of consultation to take these factors on board. What we're proposing here is turning these old unregulated premises, currently a building site, into something that will enhance the market, something that will make life better for everybody, and something that won't contribute to the kind of difficulties that you've read about. I have nothing further to add.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Robertson. That's good. Mr. Seeger, you've raised your hand. Have you got a question? Sorry, it's Nick.
Sorry, I may have the wrong name against my.
You're called Florence, actually. Are you Nick?
That's right. That's my daughter. I'm Nick. Thank you very much. Sorry. I just wanted to clarify, what are therefore the proposed recorded music and refreshment opening hours on late night hours, just for clarity?
Okay, thank you. And to be honest, I've got a few clarification issues myself as well. The live music and the precise hours that you're now requesting, I think it would be good if we could clarify those. The other thing is, when you talk about restricting the numbers outside in the courtyard, I'm assuming that you're talking about restricting them to 30. Is that correct?
Correct.
Good. Okay. If you could clarify those numbers for us on the other issues, that would be good, please.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. In terms of the hours, the application, the new hours, seek to reduce those on Friday, Saturday and Sunday by 30 minutes. So that would be reducing the supply of alcohol on Friday and Saturday nights to 11:30 with a closing time of midnight. And on Sunday, that would, the application now reads for the supply of alcohol until 10 p.m. with a closing time of 10:30 p.m. Just to clarify, there is no application for live music at all. The only application is for recorded music, and even that to be at background levels. But that's simply for the half an hour on Fridays and Saturdays between 11 and 12 p.m.
And why would there be music sought at late night? Sorry,
the only reason for this is a technical one, is that prior to 11 p.m. one doesn't need a license for recorded music if one has a license to supply alcohol. It's only required for the half an hour at the end. There's no particular clamour to be able to play music between 11:30 and 12. It just means that it just gives the premises a degree of flexibility and doesn't put itself in breach when it doesn't realise that it's supposed to turn the music off at 11:30 when they're going through a dispersal process, if that makes sense.
Thank you. That makes absolute sense to me. Councillor Snell, have you got any clarification at this stage?
Well, firstly, so I know who's here, I think the man masquerading as Florence B arrived after we did introductions earlier on.
No, he's Nick Bridge.
Oh, he's Nick Bridge, okay, and he's one of the other persons. Okay, got it.
Exactly.
Sorry, I've forgotten who was who. And hopefully at some point we will be told by Rabia which of the objectors he is, because he's one of the other persons, I assume. Have I got that right? Yes.
Right, Councillor. He's on. His objection is on C1.
C1. Thank you very much. Sorry, I want to get clarity. That's straying slightly from the agenda. Yes, in terms of the supplementary document you produced, thank you. It's a very comprehensive attempt to address concerns raised by other people. I mean, I'm assuming the summary is on page 7 of that document you gave us, and I'm assuming that it'll be perfectly all right for us to put that into legalese, because some of those commitments are fairly general. The only thing that I can't really see at the moment, tell me if I'm missing it, what is the arrangement for agreeing a dispersal policy to minimize the impact on the neighbours and you know, nearby residents.
You're not missing anything. I think it's an entirely valid point. I'm afraid the solution to that, I think, is for me to read to you my dispersal policy that I have in front of me. My proposal is that we can draft a condition here where policies, from my point of view, there should be a requirement that the policy is updated regularly. No policy should be without that. I think for the sake of a dispersal policy and also a drugs policy, that we're content for that policy to be drafted in consultation with the police. But to answer your question, the dispersal policy it would consist of the following: set out the purpose of the policy, set out that, and that purpose being to minimise disturbance or nuisance to neighbours and to ensure that the operation of the premises has the minimum impact upon the neighbourhood in relation to potential nuisance and antisocial behaviour. So a statement of its purpose, a statement that this is brought to the attention of management and all staff, that the policy, and at the end, and that during the evening, management and staff will assist with the orderly and gradual dispersal of patrons, that staff members will advise patrons to leave the premises quickly and quietly. So that's a verbal reinforcement that we want people to leave these premises quietly in an orderly fashion, that there be signage reiterating that, which appears also as a condition in the operating license, that all vessels or open drinks are removed before anybody leaves the premises, and that that patrons are actively discouraged from assembling or loitering outside the premises, and that they're asked to move on. That is the dispersal policy as it is. And my proposal being that that's something that we a condition in the operating schedule is that we have this policy, that it be updated annually, and that a copy of it be provided to the police.
Well, we may go further than that and say it should be agreed by the police. We have a standard clause, and I'm assuming that you'd not object to us adding that as an additional condition to the ones that you've proposed.
I wouldn't find any difficulty with that at all.
Thank you.
Amanda, you had your hand up.
Yes, I just wanted to clarify that policy that's just been read out, that is only your draft policy. It hasn't been approved by the licensing authority. Okay, so we would need to condition that to make sure that they've had approval on that dispersal policy. Also, on the conditions that you set out on page 7 of the thing, the limit of 30 persons in the courtyard, is that seated or standing?
Seated.
Seated. And also the SIA, the number of SIA, I think if you can advise on a specific number, that would be preferred.
Yes, I was hoping you were going to advise me, but our thinking at the moment is that we have, the requirement is that we have 2 on duty on Fridays and Saturday nights from 9 PM onwards.
Yes, subject to what members say, that sounds reasonable. So if I just wanted to check that you didn't have an issue with us fixing a number, because it wouldn't be good to leave it open-ended. So, thank you.
Our view is that 2 is appropriate, but we're in your hands on that.
Good, thank you. Does anyone else seek any clarification from Mr. Overton at this point? In which case, then perhaps we can move to PC Atkins to hear from you. Are you there, PC Atkins?
Yeah, apologies. I'm having to do this on my phone. It's a bit temperamental. I'll try and keep it short as I can. We have met with Mr. Overton, I think a few times, as he's alluded to, and our representation centred around the problems we have been experiencing within Broadway Market. And I did refer to the pandemic exacerbating problems that were already in existence prior to this taking place. Hopefully, a statement was submitted or circulated from the local officer who had concerns about the number of crimes, ASB, including urination, etc., in the area. And what we say, I mean, this isn't a small venue. It does accommodate up to 230 persons. And I appreciate Mr. Overton and Market House Limited have offered the condition about everyone should be seated. What we'll say to that, and I appreciate they are looking for the flexibility to operate as a bar come restaurant. I think the last year has highlighted that people, no matter what the venue is, whether it's seated, standing, are willing to go out and have a drink. And our concern is that if the venue is successful, and I really hope it is, that people will flock to this to use it as a bar as opposed to a restaurant. And that's our concern, that it is quite a large number. It's also recognised that it was previously a venue, but this is a number of years ago. We're just concerned that this number of people in this area could exacerbate problems we already have with alcohol-related issues. And that's what our issues are.
Thank you very much. So can I just clarify, PC Atkins, that should we hear from the applicant that actually that they can provide us with substantial reassurance about the fact that this is primarily a restaurant, would you reconsider some of your objections?
I think a lot of it is we want to have a problem. I think we asked if it is a restaurant about the ancillary condition to food and the flex that I appreciate the applicant does want the flexibility to move or to be able to operate as a bar come restaurant. But where is that line? Where do people go there for food? Could we have 250 people drinking there that on that day don't want food on a Friday, Saturday night? I mean, there are a number of licensed premises acting as restaurants already in the area and as wet-led venues as well. I think that is where we stand on that concern, and it's a concern that's been brought to us by sort of local residents and local officers.
Could I ask you another question about off sales? Have you got an attitude towards the application for off license sales?
I mean, it would depend on what the off sales are. I think London Fields, Broadway Market is in a very unique position that we do have London Fields right next to it, and we have seen a lot of people drinking in the park, and it's been in the media over last year. And I don't think that is just due to the pandemic. We get nice weather; people do want to sit out in the open. But what we'd ask is the applicant looking at, is that just going to be sealed containers? Are they looking to do open containers where people can take them away? Because that could add to the issues that we've already previously seen. And I think, although we have had the pandemic, sorry, I'm forgetting my years, but last year and partially for this year, sorry, it's all merging into one these past couple of years. Are we going to have the same problems emerging over and over again where people are drinking out in the street and in the park?
Okay, thanks. So in principle, so long as the off sales are in a sealed container, you haven't got a particular problem with the off sales aspect of this application?
Not necessarily. I think my only concern is with the off sales, as long as it is regulated to a point, because we all know, even if it is in a sealed container, people can just walk away and open them 10 meters down the road.
Yeah. Okay. Councillor Snell, I wonder if you've got anything you'd like to ask PC Atkins.
I'm just wanting to clarify. We've got quite a number of additional conditions been offered up to us by the applicant. Your objection remains. I mean, we'll talk about the legal situation of this committee when we get to the discussion phase, but you're still insistent that in effect any premises, any new alcohol serving premises in the area will contribute to the cumulative impact, and basically your objection to this, there's nothing in effect you're saying this applicant can do to mitigate your concerns.
I think the major concern for us, Councillor, is it can operate as a bar, although the applicant has said they don't want to operate like that. They want to be a bar come restaurant. I did discuss, with Mr. Overton about an ancillary condition, which I appreciate the applicant is resistant to or doesn't want to have. I think that would allay some concerns if that was there. But I mean, it is 230 people. We're not talking a small restaurant with 45 people or 15, 20 people here. We do think that is quite a large number. And if there are a large number of people there drinking without taking food, we've got that problem coming back out onto the street. And the problems we have seen with ASB, drinking the street, urination, vomiting and that kind of thing, we could see.
Can I ask what was the ancillary condition that you were looking for?
It would be a restaurant condition, so ancillary to a table meal.
For anyone who was drinking there?
Yes, that's what we did discuss initially with Mr. Overton.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions for PC Atkins?
I mean, I guess it's sounding to me as if the police objection, well, we'll get to this in the discussion phase. The police objection remains, this is what I'm understanding, because the applicant is not prepared to accept the condition saying alcohol is only served ancillary to a substantial meal. So that is the main point of objection, it seems, and a lot of the other issues have been addressed. So we need to talk that through in the discussion, but let us hear from the other persons first.
Good, okay. So if we can move on to the other persons, I think that essentially is Mr. Bridge, otherwise known as Florence in this meeting.
Thanks again. I tried to dial in as myself and the link didn't work, so I came in on my daughter's connection. So thank you very much, Chair and councillors and the applicants. I just wanted to stress first that the head of the London Fields user group and other residents, a very large number are working people and have families, and a number wanted to be here and couldn't be. So I'm representing what I know to be a very widely held set of views that are regularly discussed amongst residents, particularly in the concentration of Croston Street and Derricott Street, where a lot of the impacts are felt. I'll try and squeeze this in. I mean, I would just stress, obviously, that I and my fellow residents are the only people here who actually live with the consequences of Broadway Market as it stands. And I just want to thank the police for all of their engagement. And we've heard a bit of the challenge that they face. Just to give you a tiny bit of context, on average Saturday late afternoon last year, 50 people urinated on my wall in a half-hour period and coming off the market and coming off London Fields. 40 taxis came and did a U-turn in front of my house to drop off people in a half-hour period on an average Saturday afternoon. So I'm very clear, and the residents are very clear, many of whom, or nearly all of whom, are elderly or with families, that we already face complete saturation noise levels late into the night that we find regularly unlivable. And so just on the hours that I know are legislated by the council, but to again give context, when you go to midnight, you get noise well through into the night with drunk people. It's not a cafe culture, it's an alcohol-based culture. The trucks come through our street then, the refuse trucks which wake us up, they're very noisy. They come through our street from 5:45 onwards the next morning, which I noticed the applicant said he considered would be helpful to residents, that the trucks would come through early and that would be in the interest of business and local residents. We are basically getting often for 4 nights running, sometimes just 4 or 5 or 6 hours of quiet time. And obviously no flexibility for our night workers and so on. So basically sort of up until midnight and usually well beyond every Friday, Saturday, usually Thursday, Friday, Saturday. And then from the early morning, each next morning, residents experience very high noise, very high levels of antisocial behaviour, which is evidenced. And we've sent video evidence of other applications. We now have 15 licensed premises on a small residential area cafe street, 15 licensed places, and 2 or 3 are pubs only, some are off licenses, but most are food and drink establishments. So I would say that although the council hasn't taken the judgment, the problem with looking at each application on its own merits is that we haven't got to the point of understanding the saturation. One thing that's happened during COVID is that windows have opened on shop and cafe and bar fronts. Noise levels are now hugely multiplied. The Dove is a good example of a pub that's very responsibly managed and that generally is quiet because people are inside mostly. Most of the other new restaurants and cafe restaurants are extremely noisy until the time that they have to be quiet. And they all play recorded music, which is actually a huge part of the problem. So that's the sort of general context within which this specific application needs to be considered in our view. So I would say that very strongly support the police concern that this has to be alcohol with food. We can't just have it is impossible to manage and insist that we don't just have drinkers. We already have, we feel as residents very strongly and very clearly, and evidence through numerous and endless videos we've sent through from late night experience, we feel we have an unmanageable situation now. The scale of this application, 250, is far in excess of nearly everything else on the street. We already have what we feel is an unmanageable situation, except the council hasn't yet designated a saturation. We've no doubt that's coming because we live it every day. But we're now talking about a huge, huge increase in the numbers of drinkers and eaters on the street late at night. And then obviously the cleanup comes, as I say, and it's cleaning up all of that rubbish from all of that number of people. So we see that the noise levels are already a problem and will be hugely worsened by this. The hours of rest and quiet are already unbearable and become much worse from this. So I would say at a very minimum, I would want no recorded music after that late night period. After the clock. Why would you have recorded music when you're trying to get everyone out of the place? So I think you stop the recorded music at the point that the license stops at 11:30. You certainly have absolutely no off sales. It's outrageous to think that you would just simply give people more drink to drink on our streets late at night once they're drunk, and then it becomes unmanageable. And they cannot manage. They may have security, but they cannot manage what people do then 50 yards from the bar, which is where we all live. And I think alcohol only with food has to be a condition. And I just want to also say that on the sort of front piece of the venue, our experience of the bar that was briefly there, which may be what the management is trying to replicate, maybe not, was that with the openness of the front piece, the noise all through the day is very loud, and certainly into the late night is the problem. And we have regularly street parties starting up with large crowds of drunken young people that go on till 1, 2, 3 o'clock. And the police have really serious crime to deal with and can't often get there to break things up. I know this is something that's sort of across the district, but I think that the problem we have is that this is all good for people who can make money in these businesses and people who can come in and then go home, but it's the residents who have to live with what is already a very, very anxiety-inducing situation for many. And there's also been a really unpleasant reference from some other less responsible landlords on the street that this is about sort of NIMBYs coming in and buying properties and not being able to face the culture of the market. It's absolutely nonsense. With people in the street who've been there 40, 50, 60 years, elderly, insomniac, long COVID, with cancer, their lives are really made hell at the moment by the late night inability. And the culture that is generated and exacerbated was already there, but exacerbated by COVID, where it's more outdoors, it's warm weather, and all those problems that follow. So I've mentioned my conditions. I'm sorry and thank you for giving me so long, Chair. I'll be quiet. And I think you've got the representations from Kevin, Flemon, and others on paper who was unable to join in person. But many thanks indeed for hearing me. I appreciate the conciliatory approach of the applicant, but I do feel it glosses over those very real problems that we face. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Snell, do you have any clarifications you'd like to seek from Nick at this point?
Well, I'm looking at Appendix C1, which we were told was his objection, and that does focus very much on late hours, which has since been reduced. But some of the other objections I note, in particular the one from the London Fields Users Group, was much longer. And from the submission he's just made, I'm assuming that the fact we're now looking at more reduced hours does not lessen his opposition, and that he feels himself representing those wider views as well. And have I understood that correctly?
By the reduced hours, what do you mean that I'm objecting to? Sorry, you're just on mute, sir.
You're on mute.
Okay, so the supplementary papers that are put round by the applicant that they outlined earlier do reduce the hours to core hours. And I'm just checking that you still maintain your objection to this application despite those reduced hours.
Yes, that's correct. And unfortunately, the scale of the new venue and the what we feel to be the inevitable consequences, no reflection on the personal application, but yes, we feel that just augments what's already a at times an unlivable situation for the residents. Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you. At this point, then, I think we can enter into some discussion about some of this. I'm assuming, Mr. Overton, that you're going to be answering the questions, but other people from Market House can perhaps chip in as well. First of all, I suppose my observation is that since you've knocked two premises into one and have therefore significantly increased the footprint of this, we are looking at not just a sort of renewal of a license, as it were, but a sort of quite a significant extra area which is now going to be licensed as well. And I think this is partly what's concerning residents, because, and indeed the police, because of the sheer scale of the numbers of people who are now going to be in this area. I wonder if you can recognise the concerns that both police and residents have, and tell us why it's given that you want to be a bar restaurant with an emphasis on seated meals and waiting service, why you're so keen to maintain the bar element.
Well, thank you very much. And I think in respect of the last part of your question is I may at that point hand over to a representative of Market House Limited who may want to explain that part of the vision. But if I could deal with the premises themselves, and you're absolutely right, these premises have been knocked together. I'm not sure really how much the footprint of these premises is increased by that. But I would say that what we have gained in size, perhaps, we will also have something that's far more regulated than that which was there before it. Mention was made of the Dove before, and of course this is next door to the Dove, and the license that we're applying for here is nothing like the Dove's in terms of the times and the amount of restrictions. So yes, it's larger. I don't know how much larger it was than the two premises put together, but I'm willing to accept it probably is. But I should say it's much more heavily regulated than the license that was there before it. And of course, the complexion of the premises is very different with this emphasis on food. I don't know if I can hand over to or invite Eric Ratton of Market House Limited to address us on the issue of the bar restaurant. That is the applicant's vision. We feel that the condition that's been proposed, which limits the numbers of vertical drinkers, and which makes it clear that save for that very limited number, alcohol can only be supplied by waitress service to people seated at tables. It might not go all the way that the police would like. That additional bit is, and that be ancillary to a substantial table meal from the menu and so on. But our submission is it's almost there. The mere fact that there are seated patrons and they're being served by waitresses, that changes the complexion of this building fundamentally from something that could just flip over into a bar if the owners got tired of food or the patrons weren't hungry. We say that it makes a substantial difference. But I don't know if I invite Eric to address the team on the issue of that side of things.
Julian, thank you. So I'm not quite sure where to start, so I'll try and be brief. First of all, I do live right across the canal from Broadway Market. And so, in response to Nick's comments, I certainly am more than aware of the issues created by having lots and lots of late night drinkers on the street, and this is why I am keen that the operator of the building will be somebody who will not move to a bar stroke restaurant. It will be a restaurant stroke bar. The emphasis absolutely is on restaurant. Okay. In respect to the off license sales, or off sales, however you call it, I don't want an off license there. There are other places on the street that exist as off licenses. What I want to ensure is that any operator here is able, if they have people coming in to get takeaway food, are able to buy their alcohol if they so desire it, to have with their food, with their pizza or whatever it is that they should choose to go and eat on London Fields. But these are we have to respect that the individual licensees must adhere to the fact that they should not be serving people who are intoxicated. And I'm very sorry if the police have had to deal with as many people as Nick has referred to for being in a state of intoxication. Market House Limited has residential property on Broadway Market. It is absolutely in my interest to make sure that the quiet enjoyment for the residents is facilitated by what we are trying to put into this premises.
Can I just clarify a couple of things? From the way you're speaking, it seems to me as though you are applying for the license. I don't know if you own the property or if you're a leaseholder on the property or how it works, but you're planning to allow Market House Limited to run the business. It won't be you running the business. Is that the way that it's going to work?
So Market House Limited is the freeholder of the property. We will not be running the property. We will have a tenant within the property.
Okay. So at the moment, that tenancy has yet to be arranged, does it? Is that the situation that you're?
That is absolutely correct.
Okay.
Yeah. No one will accept a lease for the building without a premises license.
Right. Okay.
Thank you, Eric.
Can I just press a bit further on that? I mean, have you got to the point of having preliminary discussions with people, potential lessees?
Can you repeat that? Sorry.
I'll just take a comment from Amanda because she's put her hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I just wondered if you wanted to clarify with the applicants or their representative, is this more of a shadow license, or is it, because obviously it's for them to be able to have a license, but obviously because they're not running it themselves, I assume that the actual tenant will have to apply for their own license, or what was the nature of this application from the outset?
I mean, if I could answer that. I mean, the position at the moment is the position is unclear, mainly because there is no license in place. So it's difficult to negotiate with tenants. I think that's as Mr. Ratton has explained, is that the view that there will be a tenancy. It could be a shadow license. That premises license could be transferred. The vision is very clear, but the difficulty is moving forward with that vision without the license being in place. What Mr. Ratton and Market House Limited want to do is to have an appropriate license that's so well regulated that if a tenant is found, that it can be successfully and sensibly run under the auspices of that license without causing any difficulties. But at the moment, progress can't be made because tenants can't be found because there is no premises license. And it's a
Okay,
new
so,
development. Of course, the planning permission was granted on the basis of this, so it's an extension of this development, very much in the hope that an operator will be found once the license is in place.
I guess I suppose therefore my next question was going to be about takeaway meals, because I haven't seen any reference to takeaway in anything previously. But of course, at this stage, you don't actually know if this premises is going to be used for takeaways or not, because you've got nobody actually running a business in there. I suppose yeah, okay, I've got a couple of people who want to speak. I think Councillor Snell wants to say something first, and then PC Atkins.
Yes, I was trying to establish the nature of the business, Councillor Roots, so thanks for starting down that route. Because what I don't really understand is, in the application, there's a reference to the fact that the operators already run number 2 Broadway Market, which I think is was formerly the Sir Walter Scott House and subsequently was Little Georgia restaurant many years ago, if I remember right. It's not a venue that I use, and I was hoping that basically the applicants could explain how what they're proposing here differs from that. But by the sound of it, that is not relevant. Have I understood that correctly? That is not relevant to our consideration of this application. All we're doing is setting in the wide parameters for how it should operate, and then they will subsequently get someone with no known track record in the area to take it over and run within the parameters we set today. Have I understood that correctly?
Well, I'm not sure that would it would necessarily be an operator with no track record operating in the area. And again, we might see clarification on this, but I think clarification is provided in the submissions, in that the applicant here is the head leaseholder of the premises at number 2 Broadway Market. The freeholder here previously held a premises license at these premises. I think that premises license was transferred and then surrendered when the premises was redeveloped. So over many years, there's a combination of owner, operator, license holder, and so on, and that's where the close association that we talk about, that's where that comes from. So Eric's got his hand up and he can help us with that.
Yeah, so just to explain about Sir Walter Scott House. So Market House Limited was the license holder when that existed, both as La Vie en Rose and as Little Georgia restaurants. Then we sold a lease to Market Cafe London Limited, and they now have the license for that premises.
Thank you. I'm going to set out where I'm coming from on this application, because it allows Amanda to correct me if I've not understood the situation properly. It allows the other persons, the local residents, to understand the constraints that I believe that we're operating in, and then hopefully sets the scene that the applicant perhaps try and allay our concerns. So, my understanding is that the previous license was handed in. To play safe, to some extent, you can keep the existing license there, but it costs money and it's there for somebody else to take over. But it was surrendered on the basis that there was going to be a big redevelopment, and it saved a bit of money on the redevelopment. That said, the council generally has taken the view that if there was a previous license, then it looks warmly or more warmly towards new applicants. The major issue here is the scale of the new premises, and therefore evidence there's a significant increase in the potential impact on the area. We do know that Broadway Market is an area suffering from cumulative impact, and we're currently reviewing its status within our licensing policy. However, without there being an SPA in place, we have to look for the reasons why this particular development would contribute to cumulative impact. And to me, the strongest reason so far is the fact that the new premises are considerably larger than what was there before. What I'm not at the moment satisfied has been explained to my satisfaction, is why on earth we can't have the condition linking alcohol to substantial. Well, two things I'm going to mention. Number one is why we're not linking it to substantial food. It sounds to me as if the police would be greatly satisfied that if we were creating a restaurant, which is what the applicant says they're interested in, then I don't understand why that condition can't be added. I also don't understand, when you haven't got a specific operation in mind, why we can't agree to that condition. And if you can't find an applicant, you can come back and seek a variation later. But as far as I'm concerned, that would allay many of the concerns of the police. The other thing I would point out is that what we can do is put in quite tight conditions on off sales. And if you look at the minutes that we've approved alongside this agenda, I sat on that committee, I chaired that committee, and there we put strict conditions on exactly how off sales alcohol would be supplied. And I would therefore be minded to look at putting a similar condition on this, because I do worry about people just walking off with a bottle and opening it in Broadway Market. I mean, okay, I know that there are a number of off licenses on the market which will sell alcohol much cheaper than this place will, and so anyone with any common sense is going to go there. But you know, that's one way of ensuring it is at this stage a food-led business, which is not therefore contributing to known problems on Broadway Market and London Fields. I suppose the last thing that I'm concerned about is takeaway. I don't particularly want us approving a license in an area that we know is already overloaded, that is quite so flexible. I would far rather, I think it's far more in line with our licensing policy to actually put in a number of restrictions. And if you can't operate within those restrictions, by all means, come back and seek a variation. And this is where Amanda is going to tell us whether we can take this approach or not. But it seems to me perfectly reasonable at this stage to say, okay, this is a license that would allow things that we and the police would be happy with along Broadway Market. You can come back and ask us to change it later, but those would address the particular concerns raised with us today. And I'm putting that in the debate now. That's what I'm considering. You need to argue me out of that if you don't want that written into the final decision we make today.
And if I might just sort of add to that, my own view, I suppose, is that since we don't know which operator we're dealing with, it's very difficult for us to make any kind of assessment on whether or not they are good licensees. I mean, normally we would be able to look at a track record for somebody. At the moment, we can only look at your track record as the landlord, as you like. That's a very different situation to being able to look at how somebody actually operates a license. And so in the absence of being able to check somebody's track record, it would incline us more, I think, towards some fairly strict conditions, which, as Councillor Snell says, if you can find somebody who can work with those conditions, then they may well be able to come back and look for some loosening later on. But you know, I'm quite nervous about the prospect, particularly given all that we've heard about what's happening in the Broadway Market area, about creating a license which is a carte blanche for all sorts of people to come in, including people who may ultimately want to end up running a takeaway with off sales. You know, I mean, at the moment, as this stands, those are the people who could come in and run what you're offering. Anyway, we can take some comment on that in a moment, and let's just see what PC Atkins has to say, because he's had his hand up for a while.
Thank you, Chair. I think I'm maybe repeating what's just been said. I know the applicant's looking to operate as a restaurant cum bar. I wasn't aware that it was they were going to be seeking tenants, but how can we guarantee that any tenants that do take on the license will not want to operate in a different style to the vision of the applicant? And we've all seen bars where you can sit down, such as cocktail bars in different parts of the country where there is a requirement to sit down and people aren't standing. So I think that's a concern I'd like to raise on that point.
Thank you very much. Okay, well, in that case, I think perhaps at this point we need to go back to the applicant to hear their comments on what you've just heard.
If I could just address you on the issue of the operator and the lack of the track record with the operator. Seems to me that that's a little unfair, in that if the basis of my application was that we were great operators and you could trust us to run this establishment in a fantastic way, I would be reminded that transferring premises license to other people is a very straightforward process. It costs 23 quid and you fill in a form and it's transferred away. And it's one of those fundamental points of a premises license, that this license stays with the premises and it has to enshrine the vision not only of the owner in this case, but it has to enshrine all of those conditions to make sure that whoever operates it, that it's not undermining, if it's adhered to, that it's not undermining the licensing objectives. So with the greatest respect, I don't see that as a difficulty. That's why the premises license is there. It codifies, it regulates, it makes sure that if you stick to the conditions, it ticks every box for the licensing authority, the police, the residents, whoever it is. So with respect, I say that's not something that should concern us. I think on the issues of the other issues raised, regarding the rest, whether this is a full restaurant or not, the ancillary meal request. I don't know whether I could be permitted to spend some time with my clients on that issue. The issues are the substantial food, the ancillary condition that the officers referred to. There's a takeaway issue. And there's restrictions on off sales. I should say, I think my early indication on off sales is that I don't think there's any resistance or difficulty from us in some restrictions on those off sales as suggested. And indeed, I think we in the original application, we've said no open containers and so on. But I would say as a matter of principle, I think my clients are content for me to say restrictions on off sales don't cause them difficulty. I think where I might need some time with my client is on this issue of the ancillary condition that the officer has mentioned.
Could I'd just like to ask Councillor Snell quickly, what sorts of additional off-sales conditions were you thinking of, Councillor Snell, other than sealed containers? You're on mute, Peter.
If Mr. Overton wants to talk to his client for a minute, when they come back, I will find it in the minutes that we approved earlier, and I will read it to the meeting. It's here somewhere.
Okay.
You will be able to look on Council's website the minutes if Mr. Overton wants to look at the minutes that were published on the Council's website. It will have it there, but we will also locate it. Chair, can I just ask, before Mr. Overton considers speaking to his client, hello?
Hello?
Yeah. There's just a couple of points. With the transfer of the license, I don't know if Mr. Overton is aware that the police still have to approve that transfer. It's not just a blanket once this license is given that no one else looks at it. The police still have to approve it, so they will still have a say. And if they object, then that will become apparent at that time. Also, because it's now clear that this is a landlord seeking the license as opposed to being the actual operator, would your client be willing to consider reducing the capacity numbers at the bar, whether that's an option or not? So I don't know if you want to consider that at the same time. and also the the bar and yes, and also you're going to consider the restaurant conditions and because what we want is you to have a general, if you're going to have a license, it needs to have obviously the broad spectrum of the conditions, but will your client still be able to agree all these policies and things? We want to make sure that that's all in place as well. I can't think of anything else. I'll have to come back to you if anything else comes to mind. Thank you.
Could I just read out the condition that we were talking about earlier?
Sure.
Essentially, it's on page 25 of the written agenda, and it reads, alcohol shall not be sold, supplied or consumed on the premises otherwise than to persons taking a substantial meal from the menu or those waiting to be seated on the premises. Supply of alcohol shall be by waiter, waitress service only. All of sales of alcohol shall be in sealed bottles and wrapped to take away from the premises. So, it could be stronger, but we felt that gave us a little bit of satisfaction. It wasn't just going to be taken straight across to London Fields and opened up for a party on London Fields. So it's not that onerous, but that's the strongest one I can remember recently.
But in terms of those conditions, the one that I'm kind of interested in is the idea that all alcohol should be served by a waiter, which essentially would get rid of the conventional vertical drinking situation, I suppose. I wonder if you could consider with your clients who are interested in maintaining the restaurant bar idea, if they would consider that all alcohol should be served by a waiter rather than bought at the bar in a standing position. And I need to just ask Nick, because he's had his hand up for a long time, what he wanted to say before you go off, because there's no point in you going off and then us raising other issues afterwards that you need to go off again. So Nick, what did you want to say? You're on mute.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to check on my question about the open frontage, which has made such a huge difference to the problems on other properties, including full restaurant properties, the noise levels that go into the night, and the number of people who may be able to stand outside. That's another huge problem, because then it gathers and it's very hard to police. And I wonder if we have a condition where do we have soundproofing? Do we have indoor? Are all the windows, open onto the street, and how many people would be allowed to stand in front or sit on tables in front of the restaurant and effectively externalize all the noise problems that are inevitable. And just while I've got you, because I'm apologize, I work for a very demanding minister who's about to call me, and I have to take the call. If I do jump off, I just wanted to say I was grateful for the police reply confirming their concerns on the scale, and I agree fully with Councillor Snell's points about the 3 areas of conditionality, which would at least give us, and Kevin and Louise Brewwood, who have put in their comments as well, it would at least give us some sense that things were being properly policed. I didn't really feel from Julian's comments, he mentioned vision and philosophy quite a lot, and I just think we should just stick to the point that we're talking about drinking and noise, and I take Eric's well-received concerns about the impact on the neighbourhood. The problem is that at this scale, it is impossible not to contribute to the problems with the best will in the world. So I really think it's important that we look at those conditions that have been set out by the councillor. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Julian, I wonder if you want to respond to that before Nick has to go away.
I will. I'll try and respond to everything, and forgive me if it was rather a lot to respond to. Forgive me. In the application, we do have a condition at the moment. In the original application, no alcohol is to be taken outside of the licensed premises as defined on the plan at any time unless sold in sealed containers for consumption away from the premises. So we're trying to address the issue of drinking outside the premises. In answer to your question, Nick, I think the answer is none. In terms of open,
so there's no space outside that's yours.
I don't believe so. Eric might.
The pavement is not. You're able to drink and put tables on the pavement. Is that correct?
I might seek some clarification on that. My understanding is that our application here is that we've got a red line around the licensed premises. There'd have to be a separate application for a pavement license for any tables, chairs, and so on. I think there is a small concertina bit of the front with respect of 2 tables in the towards the right of the building, and Eric might confirm that, but that's the nearest that we get to open frontage. So I think in answer to your question, my understanding is no, and I'll be corrected on that. And forgive me, I've entirely forgotten all the other things I was supposed to respond to.
Okay, so as far as I can see from the map,
Yes.
there is no street, no tables in the street at the front.
Yeah, the red line is on the perimeter of the premises, including the small courtyard.
Yeah. And you think there's a kind of concertina window or something, do you? Eric, can you describe how do the windows work?
They're bifold doors on 30 and 32 Broadway Market. So the 2 next door to the Dove. But in respect to Nick's concerns about the open front, there are tables and chairs all the way along the Broadway Market's pavement outside the Dove and along Jackman Street, I think it is, that goes down the side of the Dove, whereas there is no there are no tables outside of the building that we have at the moment. It just has the bifold doors to facilitate customers coming in and out of the property. Yeah.
Okay. Is that
regarding,
for you?
So I'll just go back. So regarding PC Atkins' comments, I wish that I could give an absolute unconditional guarantee about what kind of a premises that what kind of a business is going to be run from within it. We have spoken to a number of interested parties, including some who operate other businesses on Broadway Market, who absolutely unequivocally are more than aware of the licensing issues along the street, and it is in my best interests to always make sure that this that the operator within the building looks after the street and looks after the other people who live up and down the street, because otherwise the residential property that we have on the street, we have no tenants. And so it's absolutely foolish to think that I would not be very seriously considering how the business is going to operate that is in the place. And I don't want a bar in there.
But in fairness, I guess this is where we can help you, in as much as if we can set the conditions in the right way, you will have something to be able to wave in front of your tenant in the future if they're not behaving well. So, we're all trying to work together here to get the best result for everybody. If I could just ask, I've got 3 people now with their hands up. I think Amanda's first, then Councillor Snell, then Julian.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of points then, just to go back, can you double check that you covered any things relating to deliveries? Because I know that the other persons had mentioned these early morning deliveries, so I don't know if you can maybe consider having those at a reasonable time so that it doesn't cause a disturbance. I'm assuming from what you said that you definitely will not be having any tables or chairs on this area at the front of the premises, so that unless you amend your application, it's only going to be in the courtyard area. Okay. Also, are you? Go on. It's okay.
I was going to say that I need to check the planning application.
Right. Okay. But
I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay, but the licensing application, though, for alcohol, no alcohol will be served at the front of the premises unless you apply for a variation. It will only be in the courtyard outside for now.
Okay.
That's what we're saying at the moment. I appreciate you have to double check the planning, but also, are you agreeable to the capacity being limited for the premises? I know there'll be 30 outside in the courtyard seated, but there'll be 100 in each the basement and the other level. Yes. And so if you could just double check that. And then also smoking, I don't know if you've covered that in your conditions, if you can just double check that. And also, because of the concerns with local residents, would you be agreeable to conditions of likely to have sort of customer liaison meetings, client meetings with local residents to deal with any complaints or ongoing issues, and also to have contact details available for complaints to be made, and those contact details to be also on display at the premises. So we'll be sort of looking for something like that.
I think that's part of the amended application, actually.
Yeah, and then also with the hours, I don't know if you want to review whether or not Monday to Wednesday, whether or not you want to consider reducing any hours to assist or to appease the local residents. I don't know. I'm not saying you have to do that. I'm just saying when you're considering your other points, I don't know if you want to look at the hours to see that it's reasonable so they have some breather. And I think that's most of what I've covered. Okay.
Good. Thanks, Amanda.
Thanks.
Peter?
Well, thank you. I mean, I was picking up on the fact is, Mr. Overton has started to address our various concerns, okay? But he's come forward to address Nick's points in particular. The clause that he read to us was about no alcohol being taken outside, but exactly as Amanda says, I can't see a condition in there at the moment talking about the number of smokers outside. And although at the moment perhaps smokers could be using the outside space at the back, one assumes that in the long term people want to come out the front of the building to smoke on the street, and we would normally set a limit on the number of smokers allowed outside at any one time. So we just need to throw that into the discussion. Thanks, Amanda, for reminding us, but I'd already picked that up.
Very good. Mr. Overton.
Thank you. I wonder if I will try and address you on all of these points, but I wonder also whether I, as I mentioned earlier, if I could have a few minutes with my client. But,
yeah.
But in terms of deliveries, our intention, which I think was clear in the application, that we were mindful of the way the market operates, and we were trying to arrange for deliveries to be at a time that would cause the least amount of disturbance. There was no other motive but that. And there seems to be a disagreement from residents about what that time would be. And I don't think that my client's going to have any objection if we're as to when that optimal time is. We just don't want to cause anybody any disturbance. We anticipated there might be some disturbance. That's why we put the condition in. But we thought that having them earlier would be a better idea. So I think on that, I can safely say we are flexible on that, and we just want that to be successful.
And can I just ask, Mr. Bridge, I mean, what would you think would be a reasonable time? No deliveries before 8 o'clock? That kind of thing?
Yes, and by the way, I don't want to also sound like I'm sort of individually making these points. I do have a large number of residents on the street who have been making to me the point about the trucks. So it's both refuse, it's primarily refuse trucks in the early morning, and then it's primarily late night drop-offs and taxi and Uber pickups late in the evening. And that's why I'm so concerned about the late hours that I just locked in, which this applicant can't do anything about. In the morning on delivery, 8 o'clock sounds reasonable to me. If you know, I'm not an expert in what will allow a commercial business to function, and I don't want to put them out, but that does feel like, from a resident's point of view, the sort of thing that we we would like to see, including actually on the clear up side as well. Unfortunately, it's just that it's so noisy in these narrow little old streets that, you know, it wakes a very large number of people up, as I say, including shift workers and so on. So thank you.
Thank you. The second thing on my list is I think there were two slightly different suggestions in terms of the seated nature of the enterprise and the waiter-waitress service. Just to be clear, what we are suggesting is that the supply of all alcohol be by way of waiter service to people seated at tables, save for a limited number of vertical drinkers at the bar. And I say this because in the plan we have 2 bars which will be built, and one imagines that some patrons might like to stand at the bar because kind of that's what it's for. And I think this one suggestion was that we limit those numbers of vertical drinkers from those currently offered. And another suggestion put forward is that we have no vertical drinkers. And I just wanted to clarify our position was to limit numbers of vertical drinkers. That reason being is that there are bars on both floors to be built. But as we perhaps said before, we think around 80% of the occupancy would be seated at tables. If I may, I'll discuss that with my client.
If you could, that would be good. And I would just say it has to be, you might think about limiting the number beyond 20. At which point, actually, they could be seated on stools.
Quite. And they may well, in reality, they may well be, but that's that. Yeah. I think tables at the front we've dealt with. That's not within the scope of this application. It would require a pavement license. It would require a variation application.
Okay.
Capacity limits. I'll talk to my client about it, but the capacity limits derive from planning. They derive from based on health and safety observations, fire assessments, and so on. That's where those numbers come from, just by way of explanation, rather than anything else.
Can I just ask you, Mr. Overton, when you're talking to the client?
Yes.
I mean, I would like to hear a position on whether they would be willing to essentially dispense with the vertical drinkers altogether. I mean, I think you can have a bar and still make use of it in a practical way.
Thank you. In terms of smoking, one of the conditions that we agreed to with environmental health was a condition that adequate numbers of ashtrays are for patrons are provided at the front of the building. So in anticipation that that's where smoking would take place, I think it was Councillor Snell talked about restricting those numbers. I can't see any difficulty for us in that.
I mean, for a premise like this,
sorry to jump in, Chair, but that's where the drinking can take place, obviously, and that's what people often use it for. So sorry to jump in.
That's all right, but that's quite all right. But that's in conjunction with our existing condition that save for sealed containers, that we don't allow drinks to leave the premises.
Yeah, it is possible to allow smoking outside and not drinking outside, and I imagine that's what we'd be trying to do.
Exactly.
Which I have to say makes the prospect of smoking outside much less attractive. So you know, the numbers can be kept down a bit that way as well too. So for a premise like this, I don't know, but I mean, 4 to 6 seems to be a number that comes up quite a lot. So you could perhaps think about that.
Thank you. I think there's another suggestion of meetings with local residents and so on. Can't see any difficulty with that. I know it's quite common for specific organisations to be named in licenses, and I can't see a problem with that. And I think the final thing, and I'll be told if I've missed anything, was contact details to be made available. This is something that that appears in the original application, and I hope in a full enough form, that we've said that contact details, including a telephone number, will be made available for a manager at all times to local residents and businesses. It's a condition I like. It seems to me a perfect condition. If there are complaints, they complain to the manager or the operator rather than anybody else, and problems get solved much more swiftly. But that is already in there. So again, I don't see that as a difficulty. those were the kind of 7 issues that I noted. I don't know if there's anything else that I need to address.
Amanda, is there something that you wanted to add to that?
Oh, sorry, there was an 8th one.
It's the opening hours,
The
whether
hours.
or not it needed to be 7:30, given that your alcohol hours start from 10. I think that was the last time. Yeah, it starts from 10. Yeah. So if you want to consider whether or not you wanted to. Okay. Thank you.
And Suba, you wanted to say something.
Yes, Chair. It's just one of the requests made for the police to remove the non-standard hours. So whether you want to clarify on it as well. Thank you, Chair.
Well, we've gone to standard hours, haven't we now? I think that might have been something before the change of hours.
We have to delete the non-standard hours because that's usually not granted by the police, because they want to be able to monitor what happens by application at the relevant times at New Year, so they can arrange the relevant cover. They don't usually agree to non-standard hours, so that's not a standard condition.
Good. Okay. I think at this point we should probably leave you to have a word with your client. Shall we? How long do you need? 10 minutes? 5 minutes? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, my client and I can disappear from this call and log back in if that's the easiest way to do it.
That sounds like the easiest thing to do.
Inconveniences the least number of people, I guess.
Yeah. We'll just stand by and wait for you to come back.
Thank you. I'm going to see if I know how to do that. But
I think you can.
You could go non-visual and take your sound off. You could do both of those and then go away and come back.
I'm going to do that. Thank you.
Good. Right. And everybody else, this is an opportunity for a comfort break if you need one.
Thanks, Jack. Could I just check what time you're thinking this will likely wrap? I've just got to make some arrangements.
It feels to me like we will be finished by 4 o'clock, I would think.
Great. Thanks so much. Thanks, everyone.
thank you all very much. I've spoken to my client, who I think hopefully should be joining us soon, and we're ready to proceed.
Good, thank you. Perhaps I could just ask if those people who have been away could just pop their cameras on, even if only for a moment, so we can see if you're back. Good. Excellent. So, Mr. Overton, what have you got to report back?
Thank you very much. And I'm taking these in order that I wrote them down rather than in order of significance, I think. Firstly, in terms of deliveries, my client's a bit, he's worried about the 8 a.m. suggestion. We seek to cause no mischief at all. He's telling me about the bollards on Broadway Market when they go up and down and when these things happen. So I feel as though we're in the subcommittee's hands, really, or regarding that, because we don't wish to disturb the neighbours, but we don't wish to tie anyone to conditions that can't be complied with because they're beyond their control. I accept that's not a very helpful way for me to start this this session, but that seems to be our position. So I guess we're in your hands on that one. My client's suggesting 7 a.m. But again, we're not seeking to make any mischief at all. In terms of I think the substantive issue of as the officer, as PC Atkins calls it, the ancillary condition, yes, we agree. Meals, substantial meal only, all the usual conditions, that the supply of alcohol is contingent on purchase of a meal from the menu. In terms of the vertical drinking, we would like to maintain some vertical drinking, and we apply to reduce those numbers to 10 at the bar on the ground floor and 10 in the basement. We anticipate these are people who are waiting to join their friends or waiting for meals and so on. So some degree of vertical drinking at the bar, but we're hoping that the reduction of that, in conjunction with the restaurant condition, no supply of alcohol other than with substantial meal, would help or answer the issues. On capacity, we suggest reducing the capacity of the basement from 100 to 70. Smoking, I think, if I've not already indicated, we are content to have the numbers of smokers limited, a suggestion of 5. I think Councillor Snell said between 4 and 6, so a number of that nature. For the sake of clarity, again, we've no difficulty with consulting with local residents or groups on issues. Again, for the sake of clarity, yes, we do have a condition in our original application to make known a number, telephone number, contact details for a manager at all times of the licensable activities taking place. In terms of the starting hours, we're being asked to consider reducing the 7:30. We're interested in the breakfast trade from 7:30. We wish to keep those hours, albeit that the licensable activity doesn't start until later. And I'm very much hoping I've covered everything on the list.
Thank you for clarifying about the hours. We weren't sure what the purpose of the 7:30 was. That's why.
Yeah.
Otherwise, now you've clarified it. It helps us to understand.
I don't think I can see anything from my notes that you haven't covered. Could I just ask Mr. Bridge if he's still there? Looks like he may have gone. No, he's still there. Given the issue with the bollards and what have you, which I'm afraid I don't know what the timings on the bollards are, how would you feel about the 7 a.m. suggestion for deliveries?
Yeah, I mean, I like the client. I sort of in your hands as to. I appreciate the recognition of the problem and to solve it in a way that works with the wider hours that function for businesses in the market. It's just to avoid that really early stuff. Yeah, so I don't quite feel qualified to dictate, as it were.
Perhaps Councillor Snell can tell more about this than me, but I thought that refuse collection and what have you didn't start before 7 o'clock anyway. Quite often, I think, certainly council collections, I think, only kick off at about 7, don't they? For the same sorts of reasons that Nick's talking about.
I mean, the point about Broadway Market, it has the barrier across at one end, for which the refuse trucks will have their own keys. And then it has the bollards at the end near London Fields. I cycle down there. I really am not aware of when they go up and down. You know, I just go around the side of them. So sorry, I can't really advise on that one.
Just
No,
to jump
me neither.
in, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Snell. I think if I could just elaborate on that, and then sorry, we don't want to distract from the issues of the applicant, but yes, it definitely it's recorded from much earlier, 5:45, 6 o'clock, 6:30, and certainly before 7. But I had the same understanding as you, Chair, that there was meant to be a limit. It just was perhaps, I think, the sheer volumes of refuse now generated in the market mean that, you know, now we had one truck come down once a week down Croston and Derricott to get our rubbish. And now, because the rubbish tips are on our streets around the back and the bollards are there, it's easier for refuse trucks to come down. And they now come down on average 6 times a day, often very early. They're very loud. And there's a separate issue, I'll stop there, but the structure of these roads don't allow for that scale of truck. We have a 4-metre vertical drop immediately next to the road that actually we fear is causing structural damage to the houses, which we're trying to pursue separately with the council. And so they're not using the keys if they exist. And the problem of the bigger venues, I believe that this venue would be able to use the street further down to the east exit of the market. But there's an existing issue for all the current licensed properties at the top end that they're using the bins at the back of our street. And so it's a real problem, but for another conversation, but one that we've not been able to get an answer from the authorities on, both on the structural side and the timing side. But thank you for the time on that.
Okay, I mean, just perhaps I could suggest that, I mean, one of the reasons that we have a rule on the licensing committee that ward councillors aren't able to sit on applications in their own wards is precisely for this kind of thing. So you've got 3 councillors in London Fields who I'm sure would be able to take up the cudgels on your behalf, and I'd suggest that perhaps you contact them. Good, okay. Thanks very much, Mr. Overton. And it seems to me that you come back with some good suggestions, that you've responded to the objections that have been set out. I think certainly if we look at the original objections that people from the London Fields user group put in, I think that a lot of what they were raising has been addressed here as far as you're able to, and that's very good. I wonder if anybody has any concluding remarks that they want to make before we adjourn, really, to make our decisions, and we'll let you know. Should be able to let you know tomorrow. Nick, you wanted to say something more?
Apologies, I missed the off-sales conclusion on alcohol and food, but I'm happy to leave that to you. I just didn't hear what the proposal was. Thank you.
That's a very good point. It wasn't addressed, I don't think, explicitly, was it? I think that Mr. Overton's position is that the off-sales, as outlined in the application at the moment, with the covered and sealed alcohol only, there's just one additional thing that Councillor Snell pointed to when he gave the other example of the off-sales restrictions, which was that they should also be packaged. In other words, they should go into some kind of a bag or another, and perhaps we could add that. I don't imagine that's going to cause huge problems if we were to add that extra condition as well to the off-sales.
No.
No? Good. Okay. Does anyone have any final comments that they would like to make? Any summings up?
Sorry, Chair. It is normal just to go them in the order that they're
in
set.
the order.
So the first one would be Hang on.
The applicant.
Responsible authorities. First one will be
Oh,
the
responsible authorities. Yes. Sorry, I'm just looking back at the notes again. So, PC Atkins, I wonder if you could offer some concluding thoughts.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think we've got anything to add. I think everything's gone over quite thoroughly with the ancillary condition as well. I think that'll be it.
Could I ask you explicitly, would you, with the ancillary condition which has now been accepted, would you now say that you would withdraw your objections?
Yes, based on the discussions we've had today and the offer of that condition.
Thank you. And Nick, is there anything else you'd like to say before we allow the applicant to have the closing words?
Just thank you everybody for the opportunity and as I say, the chance to represent a range of voices. You know, on sort of whether thank you for the flexibility on the various conditions that have been mentioned as well. I think I did say that, you know, at the beginning that obviously our perspective is around the current challenges around the market that are not yet addressed, and then this as being an additional challenge. So I would just be grateful for those further considerations around cumulative impact and so on to reflect this. We remain just concerned that, you know, the scale of this is very great and very concerning. So, but I appreciate the flexibility that is, to the extent that's been shown. Thanks.
Thank you. I have one further thought, really, which is just about the dispersal. It does seem to me that applying to have that recorded music license for that extra half hour is something which may not assist whoever takes on this lease with dispersal. And as you mentioned in your additional papers, it is very useful if different premises can try to disperse at slightly different times, so that not everybody is chucking out at midnight or 1 o'clock or whenever it might be. So personally, I would not be minded necessarily to give that recorded music license between 11:30 and 12, because I think it actually might help the licensee to get people out a little bit earlier and assist you with your dispersal policy. Would you agree to that?
I've no observations to make on that. I don't think it causes any difficulties. We were trying to be nothing more than flexible and pragmatic, but I take the point.
Thank you. Councillor Snell, have you got anything else to add before we say thank you to everybody and adjourn?
You're asking me to embarrass me, Councillor Root. I just was stuffing my mouth then before we started. No, I think we've covered everything.
Great, thank you very much. Well, in that case, thanks everybody for your time this afternoon. I hope, Nick, that you'll feel that you can report back to London Fields User Group that we have listened to their concerns and tried to address them with the applicant. And thank you very much to the applicant for being as flexible as you have been. And we'll get back to you tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.